There are a number of big achievements that you can have in your life, and one of mine is seeing how many people can I get to look at a poop emoji for a couple of minutes. So that is like challenge unlocked. All right, let's see if we can have some fun together this afternoon. But first of all, I have a question for you. Who here scrums in there? So I see about half. Let me widen the question a little bit. I'm not going to pull the that's not really Scrum card on you. Who's doing something like Scrum? 2/3 to 3/4. Okay. Why?
Corporate policies.
Okay, that is something you have to comply with, but not really a reasoning. Anyone have an argument?
It's better than waterfall.
Okay, so it's less shit than something else, maybe. Okay, it's some kind. Yeah, it's a reasoning. Fair enough. Anything else? Nobody is like, we want to limit the amount of risk, financial risk that we take in our product development to a certain amount of man weeks and have imperative control over what we do and what we do not do. Okay, so this fascinates me. There is something in our industry that we all do, and for some reason we find it very hard to explain why. And I find that interesting. So in my opinion, Scrum is overused, overrated, under-delivering, and definitely not always the best way of working. That is a very absolute statement, but I stand by it because there's this word always. Nothing is always the best solution. It's probably not the best solution in 2/3 or 75% of the cases either. So what I want to do in this session is challenge some of the things that we are doing and see if there are other ways that we can go about it. And of course, everything is in my opinion. I am married. And disagreement is a thing that comes naturally when married. At least when you're married to me. Which is a feat in itself when you look like this. But what I have found is when you disagree with somebody, the thing that you always start doing is thinking about what they say and then trying to explain why you disagree with them. And the more you think about it, the more you maybe understand why they think what they think, and maybe actually they have some kind of a point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and make you disagree with me about a lot of things. Hopefully, with you walking out of here and thinking for a while about the questions I asked and the things I said, and maybe then making some changes, meeting somewhere in the middle, because, well, I definitely don't know everything. If you're wondering and you want to file complaints afterwards, this is where you can find me. I think I finally removed Twitter. Yes, awesome. So hey, going a little bit back from this problem of just Scrum, I believe we have a big problem in our industry. And that problem is that we don't think. We copy-paste. And we as engineers have a very big attitude towards copy and pasting of code. But for some reason, there are a lot of things that we copy and paste from engineers before us. That's not code, our way of working. We need to have DTAP. We need to have 4 environments. Why? Because the guy before us did it. There is a certain way that a lot of IT departments are organized. There is a certain way we do architecture. And in a lot of cases, people just do it because the people before them did it as well, which is not a very solid way of reasoning. Maybe you are doing the right thing, but if you're not understanding why you are doing the right thing, you're probably not getting all the benefits of the right thing. So we have to better understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. Again, in my opinion. But generally, we tend to repeat the actions of others and then expect the same results. And I think that's a fundamental problem. And there is a fine example of that, and it's called cargo cult. Who knows what cargo cult is? Okay, so you two are not going to laugh, but hopefully everybody else. So, towards the end of the Second World War, the Americans were closing in on the Japanese, as the story goes. And what they did was they built temporary airfields close to the front lines to bring in supplies. So there were people on those islands waving at the skies, wearing uniforms, and then those steel things came down and they unloaded one of the most fantastic things, food. And there were people already living on those islands, and they were not familiar with the concept of airplanes and airfields. So what did they see? They saw people in uniforms waving at the sky, doing weird things, and then all of a sudden, boom, food. So what did they do? They started repeating the actions they saw. They built radar installations out of thatch. They started marching around with bamboo sticks and USA on their chest. I never understood that USA thing, but whatever. Planes out of thatch. But no matter what they did, no food. They kept repeating the actions of others, but will never ever get the same result. Now there are many variations of this story, and I don't know what is exactly true, and it doesn't really matter. It's a great story. When you look at another field, for example medicine, they are very aware of the fact that context matters in your outcome. They learn that the result comes from the context plus the intervention. They say if a white male with a weight between 70 and 90, with a bit of overweight and a big mouth and blonde hair presents himself with fatigue, this, then the recommendation is to try and lose some weight, and then you have a 75% chance that you see the following outcomes. But in IT, we do Kubernetes. It's so different. So the result comes from context plus intervention. Simply repeating other results of actions will not produce the same results. And in our context, there are so many things that completely determine the outcome of your actions, independently of the actions you take. So we have to think more about why do we do the things we do? How do we organize our way of working in the context that we're currently working in? What is important to us? Is it time to market? Maybe if you're in a highly competitive, marketing kind of space, that's important. If you're building software for fighter jets, you might be a little bit less concerned with time to market and more with quality. It depends. And then once again, I go back to you with that question, why Scrum? Is there something in your context that really justifies your choice for Scrum? I don't know. I can't answer that question. But what I can tell you is why I loathe the Scrum. I think yesterday, Magnus, you said that something about hate and that there was already enough hatred in the world. Actually, I did add this already a couple of weeks before. I don't want to say I hate Scrum, but it's really with heavy feet that I do it when I have to. And there are a number of reasons. And the first one is more than 0 meetings a week. Now, of course, 0 meetings a week is a utopia that we will probably not get to. But when you're looking at Scrum, there are when you look at how many companies practice Scrum, because there is a difference between what you find in the Scrum Guide and what a lot of companies are doing, you will see a lot of meetings around it and things that the Scrum Guide now calls events, but that people still keep calling ceremonies, which indicates that you have to be there. It doesn't really matter what happens. You can snore off. It will carry on without you. The problem is this. There is a theory which says make a schedule, manage a schedule. It's from, I think his name is Paul Graham, yes. So credits where credits are due. And it says that an ideal schedule for an engineer looks like this. Shit we do before lunch and shit we do after lunch. And generally we can do between 2 and 4 things on a day. It doesn't really matter how many story points they are. There's just something in our brain that says that we can do X things a day. A manager schedule looks like a quarter here, half an hour there. And the thing is, they drag us into that world by planning meetings halfway our blocks of thinking time, ruining a perfect afternoon of getting things done. So this is my first problem with Scrum. All the meetings that are starting to pop up all around the day. The second one is that Scrum started as a methodology, but ended as a religion. Wait for it if you're a Scrummer. According to Scrum, whenever somebody says that, I die a little bit on the inside. Because we're here to get shit done. We're not here to celebrate Scrum. That's not Scrum, I don't care. And this one, please stop right there. It's not a methodology, it's a framework. And it's intentionally incomplete. Whatever, I just care about how it helps me. And whenever it becomes the goal in itself, you probably have lost. And there is this humongous industry going on of people who have never written software and then come over to my desk and start to interfere with how I write software. Now, I'm not a great developer, of course. I'm very bad at it. But bugger off. If you want to tell me how to do it, at least be better than I am, or at least do it. And this is another great quote. Those who can do, but those who can't try to teach, coach, present at conferences. Thank you. So another thing is, I'm a big fan of agile software development. I think the world around us changes extremely quickly, and we have to constantly adjust what we're doing to the change in the environment, because that's where our software will run. However, Scrum isn't really that agile. I mean, organizational goals change all the time. Not every 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the time frame that you chose. I mean, when your manager or a very high up important director calls and he says, we need to get this done, there is a 50 million contract depending on it, and you said, well, funny that you say it, but the sprint ends next Thursday, so you can put in your request before Tuesday, and then we can consider it, if we can refine it in time. He's like, yeah, whatever. I know, I'm not asking overtime, I'm not asking you to do anything that's not impossible, but for fuck's sake, just do what I asked, please. That's the reality of businesses. Another problem with trying to forecast what you can do in the next sprint is that there will be unplanned work. Things happen. Deal with it. I mean, you can allocate some time for things that you don't foresee, but how much time do you need to allocate? You don't know. It's guesswork. And maybe you can look back and have a bit of an estimate, but if you look back, you actually see it highly fluctuates. If it's holiday, you probably get very little unplanned work, but the weeks after the holidays, you're probably going to get a lot of unplanned work because everybody is starting to spin up again. Burn down, or whatever charts or thingies your Scrum Master loves to make, it doesn't really matter. If something is broken, you need to act upon it. And if you're very strict about how you apply a Scrum framework, that's not going to work. Refinements. Who has refinement meetings? Yes. Who absolutely loves them? Yes? Oh, just kidding. Okay. Who think they are a necessary evil? Okay, so why do you do them for other people? There are reasons. One of the problems that I have with this idea of getting 6 people out of their working environment into the worst kind of room there is, the meeting room, and then starting to talk about work instead of actually doing work, is that going from a problem to solve to a solution design, seeing if something is possible, feasible, scalable, is also work. I have done my best refinements by telling everybody to bugger off and just giving it a try in Visual Studio. That is a refinement activity that I think makes a lot of sense. 6 people around a whiteboard, not always. Sometimes, but not always. Putting 5 people together that don't know, which is a business strategy, will not magically produce a great solution. If you have not enough information when you walk into the meeting room, just going back and forth with 5 people will not change that starting point. You probably have to fan out. Somebody is going to look up some documentation, somebody is going to talk to a stakeholder, and then, what do you know, it's 12 minutes past 3, we spend 5 minutes together, we quickly go over what we know, we have to do a little bit of design here, we have to check with the architect there, you split up again. It is work. It is not something you do in a meeting. And then another thing is, isn't there always one person who knows best how to do it? And I don't mean this sarcastically, I really mean this from the bottom of my heart. Because if you want to extend the ticketing system, there is one, or if you're lucky, there are 2 engineers that created that ticketing system 2 months ago. So they probably know best how to do it. So you have a refinement, you go back and forth in 10 minutes, and at some point Sally will stand up and say, yeah, okay, it's like this. She turns to the whiteboard, tuck, 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 yep, and this is where you need to change. Yeah, cool. That is because she does know best. And if there is not somebody who knows best, there's probably somebody who thinks they know best. And they're going to win in the end anyway. So, and that concludes my rant about Scrum. Any thoughts? Anybody who says, well, you're overreacting? Yes, please.
Is refinement really part of Scrum? I mean, Scrum guy don't say anything about refinement. Just say it's good to know what you will do before you do it.
So the question or remark is refinement actually part of Scrum? And you are completely correct. If you read the Scrum guide, and especially the modern versions that are getting shorter and shorter and rename everything all the time, it says about something that the work should be clear enough or well enough defined to start work, and nothing about refinement. But if you look at the industry and what is happening in practice, is that almost, at least the companies that I've worked with, refinement is a thing that you do in a meeting. So I'm talking about Scrum as I see it, and not about Scrum as in the guide. And I'll say this, there are a lot of valuable things in Scrum and in the Scrum guide, especially when it comes to principles and pillars and stuff. But for some reason, we're not focusing on that. We're focusing on the actions.
I also agree, because what I see is that refinement is just becoming an excuse of waterfall the process, right? To put a gate before, it needs to have this and this and this and this.
So refinement becomes a gate. The definition of ready is maybe something that you have encountered, and I've encountered it as well in organizations that were moving to Scrum, and it was just a way of cover my ass. So we go about it completely differently in the teams that I'm working with right now. I'll get to that. Any other thoughts? Nobody who's mad at me? That's always surprisingly. I did this talk a couple of months ago in the Netherlands, and there were 4 people sitting in seats after the talk, and I said, what do you think of it? They said, we loved it, but our Scrum Master says, and I quote, he is probably a very sour person. I don't know, I'll leave that up to you. Okay, so enough about the complaining. What then? Is there another way to organize your work? There are quite a few other ways to organize your work. Some are very well known. I mean, Kanban is a thing that pops up when people start talking about Scrum. It's all like Scrum or Kanban. But there are other methodologies out there as well. And you can also say, screw all the things that are out there. We're going to find something that works for us by changing things. And that is what we did. And I want to try and take you along on the changes that we made and how we organize our work. And it's a work in progress. Sometimes it works really well, and sometimes it fails miserably. It is absolutely not an advice. It's just an insight on what we do. So where did we start? We started with principles. And that's because there are enough manifests out there, so I thought I'd just skip those. I go to principles. And the first principle that I have is in the engineer we trust. There is nothing weirder than hiring people, giving them 100,000 a year, well, giving half of that to the tax administration and then giving them 50,000 a year, and then making sure they cannot do their work. So if they need a laptop of 4,000 euros, give it to them, and not one of 1,500. If they believe they have to go to a certain conference like SWEDAC, which is in Stockholm next year again, for your information, give it to them as a company. If they believe that just not making a design but doing code first and then documenting that code in a design afterwards, let them do it. They are producing the value. You hired them because they can do their job, or at least you think they can do their job, so get out of their way. It's very likely that they know best how to do it. And again, if you look at a hospital, it is very unlikely that the financial director of the hospital is interfering with the work of the doctors, telling them what they can or cannot advise a client. Give engineers problems and not solutions to build. The best thing happens always when you go to an engineer and says, hey, we have this problem, we need an insight into this or that, and then you pull out a design that somebody already created, and often somebody in the business who said, I need this report, and then the engineer says, so basically they need to know when the batteries run out. Yes, that's what it boils down to. So how about I make a big red light turn red when the battery is empty? Yeah, that will work as well. Great, because that will save us 100,000 euros. If you bring them the problem, they can investigate alternative solutions, use their creative thinking powers, which you hired them for. But if you give them solutions to implement, they're probably just going to go blindly down the alley that you point them to. I'm exaggerating a little bit again. And the other thing that I like is removing all the side wheels, bullshit, policies, governance, architecture, shit that doesn't really add value. There is that very last part. If we go to biking, if you give a young child a bike with side wheels, they will always bike like this. Or if they don't, they will bike like this. Because as long as the side wheels are there, they're going to use them. They're going to rely on them. If you have a very strict enforced, security pen test policy, nobody's going to look at their code and see if it's secure. They're just going to throw it up to the engine and see if it turns out green. But the more side wheels that you don't need, you remove, the more actually you empower people to think for themselves. And maybe sometimes push out a little bit less secure code, which actually fixes a very important functional thing, giving them 4 more hours to think about the secure approach. So removing the side wheels is a great thing that I like, and there's a lot of bullshit as well. I have had heated conversations with enterprise architects insisting that we upgrade our test and production environment for our current APIs to full DTAP. And I have asked the famous question, why? And the answer is, because it's mandatory. Everybody has to do it. Well, that's what I call bullshit. It's actually, it just generates costs, it takes more time, there are discrepancies between environments, it just introduces all kinds of problems for us that we don't have and we don't need for environments. 2 is enough for us. So we hoarded best practices and things we have always done it. That's not necessarily the best thing to do anymore right now. I mean, the world is different than it was 3 months ago, so definitely different than 10 years ago when that architect was still an engineer. Try to find the minimum amount of process, guidance and rules possible. So I'm not saying there should be nothing, but focus on the outcomes, the requirements. Say things like, hey, if your application is classified as 222, you should at least have TLS 1.2 or higher. And don't bugger with how they realize that requirement. Just put the requirement on them and audit it if you're not confident they're meeting it. So how would that look in a more concrete way? The first thing I think you will need, if you're looking at an organization where you want to apply this model, you're now going to need to start with splitting that very large organization into products that you're working on. I'm not a fan of projects, and I'm not a fan of fixed teams that work on 25 different things. I'm a fan of defining the IT landscape of an organization in coherent products, a group of applications or single applications or even parts of applications that make sense from a business perspective. This is, inventory, this is grading, whatever makes sense in your organization. And then for each product, appoint a team, a product owner, and an architect. And with that in place, you can start setting a clear vision for the product. As a product owner, these are the problems that we're going to solve. These are the other product teams that we are delivering to. These are our external customers, etc., etc. So I'm not talking about features. I'm talking about why the product exists. You do that from a functional point of view, which is the responsibility of the product owner, and you do that from a technical point of view, which is the responsibility of the architect. Then you make a list of problems to solve. And that, of course, can be requests that come in from those other teams or your external customers. Now, we already have the term backlog, so let's call that list of problems a backlog. And then you start at number 1. And what do you know? Once number 1 is done, you go to number 2. In essence, how you probably try to organize all the work you do in your private life, in your student life, and if you had the opportunity also in organizations. So why not start with something as simple as this? And then maybe one of the problems that you might run into is, oh, for crying out loud, we're going to need continuous integration to ensure that we have enough quality to meet the vision for the product. Sounds like another problem to solve to me. So just put it on the backlog. Requirements from enterprise architecture that you meet are just problems to solve. The problem might be to convince them that the requirement doesn't make sense, but the problem is that you need to resolve some discrepancy between what you're doing and what's expected from you. Is that enough? Probably not, but I think it's a great start if you can bootstrap a team this way. Does that make sense? Okay, then I'm going to go and try and get one more step concrete about how we do it, and I might explain things 2 times because I go at it from different angles, just as the Scrum Guide starts from artifacts and then from responsibilities and then from the other thing that I always forget. I'm going to go from different angles as well. So I'm going to start with Scrum, as most organizations do it, as a sort of baseline that we slowly deviated away from. So what we keep? We kept the sprints or iterations. Not because we're doing forecasting, not because we're doing planning, but it's just wonderful to being able to look back and see how much work you can more or less do in 3 weeks. And not because you're making promises, because it's good to know. We kept the idea of a product backlog, because it's great to know what you're going to work on in the future. We kept the notion of a sprint backlog. And for us, the sprint backlog is just the board, and at the start of the sprint, it's empty, and then somebody pulls the first thing from the product backlog to the sprint backlog, starts working on it. And then once it's done, we pull the second thing in, and the third thing, and if we are with 4 engineers in a team, so if there are too much engineers for one problem, we pull in more problems from the product backlog. So just in time. And then the sprint backlog grows, and towards the end of the sprint, everything that's not done, we just move it to the next sprint. No splitting, no points, juggling, whatever. It's just to organize our work. We have a daily sync in the morning, which is supposed to be 15 minutes or less. And sometimes it's 2 minutes, sometimes it's 30 minutes. We don't really care, because there's nothing worse than somebody saying all the time, can you take that offline? Can you take that offline? Can you take that offline? And then you have 2.5 hours of offline meetings with all kinds of interconnections between the same 5 people. Sorry? You have a thought?
Okay. Keep going.
Okay. It's good to disagree. And of course, this is context dependent, right? But we find it is more valuable to include everyone in every discussion and make sure that people don't make a point just to make a point, but it's collective decision making, and it works for us. And we kept the sprint review. And I'm going to be very honest, our sprint review is just one big update meeting to the organization. It is very bad. I don't like it, but give me the courage to accept the things that I cannot change. Then what did we remove? We removed the refinements altogether. We also removed the pre-refinements and all other things about it. We go about this differently. Because we have problems on the backlog and a clear vision, an engineer can pick up a story and look at that problem and start thinking. It's a highly underrated skill. And to come up with a number of solutions. And then you see, oh, this was filed by Stan, somebody that we work for. He calls up Stan and he says, okay, if I understand your problem correctly, and then they have a conversation to understand the problem. And they maybe come up with a number of possible solutions. And at that point, the engineer decides, I think this is the one that I want to go with. Possibly calls a peer to say, hey, I want to make this or that change. What do you think? Maybe calls me, because I'm the architect, and discusses the implications for the architecture with me. Calls the PO. He calls whoever he or she thinks is necessary to get from a problem to a possible solution. It might also be we have one engineer who just talks to nobody and works for 4 hours and then calls people and say, what do you think? That is also a refinement strategy or a decision-making strategy on requirements for me. The point is, it is work to go from a problem to a possible solution. And then there's just meetings all around that I found in agendas in my first couple of months that I had the opportunity to kill off. There was a weekly tech debt meeting where people just whined to each other about things they didn't like about the current state of things, and then they went all their separate ways. Sprint planning. Sorry?
Thought it sounded nice.
There's nothing holding them back from still doing it at the coffee machine, but we have a different way of dealing with technical debt. Okay, let me elaborate. The problem with this is that they're talking about all kinds of problems in the code base that we're not currently touching. So it's actually not hindering our work right now, but we feel there might be a risk in the future, and that might be actually be a concrete, correct risk. But making changes there without a functional reason also brings a lot of risk. because the amount of risk is more or less linear to the amount of change. So making changes somewhere in the code base where there is not really a business driver for that change, and then something goes wrong, is very hard to explain. And also making cost on something that there is nobody asking about is hard to explain. So we deal with it differently. We don't have sprint plannings because we do so much planning. We talk to each other all the time. How long do you think it's going to take? 4 days. Okay, that's not worth it. Kill the feature. We talk about things all the time and projections, but we don't have meetings for them. And about 5 to 10 other recurring meetings in all kinds of cross-sections throughout the team. What did we add? We added a backlog outlook, which is the place where the product owner for the product, every sprint once, has an hour to excite the team about the things that we're going to do next. And I really say excite the team. Because if you just bring them a backlog and on a PowerPoint sheet, everybody's going to snore off. But if you tell them the impact that we're going to make and which problems we're going to solve and how amazing that is for the organization, they will be on the benches shouting, let's go. So that's what you try to achieve in the backlog outlook. Enthusiastize your engineers. More about day-to-day work, we added one story at the top of every sprint, which we call fast lane. And whatever pops up on our radar that somebody thinks we should take a look at, but didn't plan, a monitoring alert that goes off, it goes into the fast lane. The second it goes there, the first engineer that has like a briefing moment picks up that item and decides, is this something that we need to do now? Or is this something that we can defer for 4 to 8 hours and put it as the next story on the backlog? So it moves to problem number 1. So that is our mechanism for coping with pushes from the zijkant, things that come from the side. And there is one person that is responsible for all the things that come in and putting them in the fast lane. The team has decided to call that chore duty. I'm not a fan of that term. I like positivity, so I invited to call it captain of the day, hero of the week. But unfortunately, it's ended up with chore duty. Roles and responsibilities. We have 3 roles, or actually 4 roles that we have in the teams. Product owner, architect, developer, and tester. The PO and the architect, from their respective point of views, set that clear vision. Ensure there is one clear backlog. So I, as an architect, don't have an agenda that I'm trying to play on the engineers. And no, if I think that something is important, I just put it on the backlog and I have a conversation with the PO and we balance it against functional needs. And then the other thing is, I am available and the product owner is also available. So we do this reversion of control. The engineer owns the problem and he comes to me, or she comes to me, or they come to me. Then we have developers. Developers know where to find the next piece of work. So that's either the fast lane, helping somebody else, because if we can collaborate in an effective way, we do it. And if not, picking something up from the correct location in the backlog, then does the work and is available to peers. So we find it important to stop doing what we do to help others. Yes, please.
How do you handle collaboration? Because you just talked about not wanting to do meetings, but how do you attack collaboration?
I don't attack it, I celebrate it.
Okay.
Sorry, the question is, how do I handle collaboration?
Yeah.
A meeting is something where somebody says you have to be in that room at 3, and then everybody is, working happily, has that big mental model, and you are like halfway that unit test and halfway that class, and then bling, 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 you're too late, fuck. And that whole model shatters, and you have to spend 1 hour after the meeting rebuilding that model. Collaboration, we often plan in the daily, hey, I expect this to be done more or less around lunch. Can I help somebody after lunch? Or can I call you in an hour or so? We call each other, but we feel free to just decline if it doesn't fit us. And I personally, and this is very personal, have found that if somebody calls my name and doesn't start talking, but gives me that 2 seconds to make a mental save point, it helps me to save that destruction of my mental model. Or if it's really difficult for me to context switch at that point, I can say, kan het even wachten? Can it be a few minutes? And that's just short enough for me not to destruct where I am right now. So that's how we deal with it. And also we find sometimes collaboration adds so much to the team effectiveness that the sacrifice of your personal effectiveness is worth it. So there's the trade-off. We sacrifice personal things for team things. Does that answer?
Yeah.
You don't have to agree.
No, but that's actually just a nice way of doing meetings.
And actually, we meet each other all the time.
I mean that's not a meeting room and not like the ceremony. It's just meeting people.
How are you today? Oh. We do that, and we do that in the morning, by the way, but not all day. And then we have a separate role, which is the tester. And the tester for us is a little bit different than I've seen in a lot of organizations. It is not a gatekeeper. It is not the person that we try to trick to sign off on our work and then, well, they should have found the bug. No, for us, the tester is an advisor to the engineer. So I, as an engineer, want to push something to production or to test, and I reach out to the tester. I've made these changes. I've done this. I see these risks. I've written these tests. I've manually verified that. What remaining risk do you see? And together we do a very impromptu risk analysis. And sometimes he says, I don't know, I have to get back to you. But most of the time he can do it on the back of his mind because we have that daily sync. He knows what's coming. And then we together decide on moving forward or doing more testing to get the quality we need. But the engineer stays in control. And that works really well because we have 8 engineers and just software engineers and just 1 test engineer, meaning that one person doesn't have to juggle 8 things that are happening. Now there are 8 people juggling one thing and just pulling in that expertise when they need it. And the second responsibility for our test engineer is just to go take a step back. Every Friday he tries to do it, and then just think, again an underrated skill, about where we are currently, which APIs have the most inherent risk, which applications see the most bugs. So just to give a bit of a state of the union to the rest of the team. Sometimes there is nothing new, and sometimes something comes up and he just pops it in the chat. All right, zooming in on the work of an engineer. By the way, when I created this presentation about a year ago, I tried to do some experimenting with AI. People that saw my bicep talk know that I'm not a big fan. This is one of the reasons. So the first thing we do is try to determine. So I'm free of work. I'm like la 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 la, done, or I'm back from holiday or whatever. I'm very happy. I've got nothing to do, and that happiness lasts about 30 seconds because I'm an engineer and I want to do cool shit. So I see if there is somebody else that I can help, or if there is fast lane work. If not, I pick up the first PBI from the backlog to the sprint backlog, and I'm like, what the is this? Then I start refining the item, understand the problem, discover possible solution, trade-offs, talk to people, etc., etc. Decide upon a solution, implement that solution, deploy it to test, decide how to test it together with the tester. This is actually the reality. I would so love for this to go somewhere around here. And we say to each other every week that we're going to do it, and it just doesn't happen for some reason. There's always something on test, and then, oh fuck, I need to test this. And then we do it. And we deploy to production, and then we validate it's working as expected. Bless you. We don't have a definition of done, but if somebody asks me, what is your definition of done? Our definition of done is there is at least one user happily using the feature in production. And there is a lot in that definition of done. A user who's happy, so apparently it meets expectations or solves a problem that's completely different than it is as designed. We are able to measure or know that we have a user and that they are happy. So there's a lot in that one line. But this is our complete workflow. The engineer, we call this walking to production, this last part. 9 out of 10 times an engineer will go into the production environment, try to do something themselves to really validate that everything is up and running. And that way, if something is not, we can detect it within seconds and roll back. And then C number 1. We found that this makes engineers very happy. There is one thing that they can work on, they can see it through, they can get it done, and then they do the next thing. There are a number of other things as well. If you start working on something and you find out it's more than a couple of days of work, you split it into multiple parts. And at some point there is no really like slicing possible anymore. You're just going to hack it in 2 parts because you need to hack it into 2 parts. And the reason for that is that we want to have a lot of decision points in our backlog where we can switch to something else. Because we have that fast lane and changes in the business all the time. So if we start a piece of work that is like 3 months, I'm taking away decision points from the business on what to do next for 3 months. So if we move that work into pieces of a couple of days, and we have a couple of engineers, I can pick up a new piece of work almost every day without somebody working on two things at the same time. That's the reasoning. No side quests. No I mean, if you work in a real organization, you get emails from managers, stakeholders, people all the time. Can you do this? And we don't do that. We just say, that's a really interesting question. I'll directly put it on the backlog for you. By the way, next time, you can put it yourself on the backlog. It works really well. So there are the two things, the amount of side quest, actually the clients, when people have to do effort themselves to get it on the backlog. Just the 10 seconds of effort that we introduce will make them ask a lot less stupid questions. And the second one is because people are now always working on one thing and it is visible what they are working on. In a lot of organizations, there is no visibility of half of the work that's being done, which is very valuable work that engineers are not getting valued for. And we try to solve that this way. Everything goes to the backlog. That's also technical problems. It's not like holidays are on the backlog, but we are pretty hefty in that. Technical debt. If you encounter technical debt, there are two possible ways that we take. The first one is fix it straight away. Apparently you need to be there, you need to make a change. Take that time needed to make sure that you can effectively make that change, because there's going to be return on investment on that change within days. If it's not necessary or there is no return on investment, actually just the debt that the interest that you're paying is not that high, then just ignore it. There is no point in fussing or complaining about something that you're not fixing, we find. Scope creep or find new work, split it off into new PBIs. So something you find, hey, this alert rule is not working. Then just split it up into new work and not try not to have scope creep on the work that you're working on. It also means that somebody with a functional view can look at it and say, yeah, we don't really care about that alert, and moves it lower on the backlog. Yeah, that's what I said. So that's how we go about our business. And it feels so simple, and it feels like we have just people looking from the outside that sometimes feel like we're like just doing whatever. It's very ad hoc, they then say, and I love ad hoc. Ad hoc does mean that all the time you are thinking about what is the next best thing to do in the next hour. It is that conscious decision making. That's what makes the difference. We don't do whatever pops up on the radar or an email. We have a very strong but simple methodology, try to think all the time. When might this work? So I've tried to identify a number of things in our context that I think make that this works. And the most important one is we are not working on anything business critical or something that can endanger lives or whatever. That means that there's a lot of governance or process that doesn't apply to us. Small team or small teams organized around clearly defined products or work streams with clear boundaries and defined interactions between those teams, supplier, user, etc. Products, not projects. If something needs to change and it's big and somebody wants to call it a project, we just move it to the backlog and say, ooh, that's an epic. Epic doesn't say anything about the size for us. It's a way for organizing things, but it makes them feel really happy when I call it an epic. But we don't do projects. Everything is aligned to a product. And sometimes if there is a product or a project happening in the organization, that means that a number of changes need to be made by a number of teams in a number of components. And that is where an architect outside of the teams comes in. A thought out high-level architecture that defines those products, the components in those products, the teams and their relationships. Of course, again, thinking. And what's important as well is that you realign it all the time, because the organization keeps changing. So we shift sometimes who works on which product, which people are in which team, etc. And because we're all close together, that works. We don't do it every week, but maybe, I don't know, twice a year, once a year. Small teams of 4 to 6 engineers. In my opinion, the ideal number of engineers in the team is 4. Very few communications. It also always means that there are 2 groups of 2 that can collaborate. But it's not always possible. Sometimes you just need more capacity on a certain product and there is no way to logically split that product into 2 products. And less than 4 becomes really dangerous because there is one person on holiday, there is one person sick, and then something hits the fan. And if you're in our case, for one product, you are stuck with 7 engineers, and you don't want a team of 7, and you don't want to do 2, 2, 1, you end up with 3, 4. Teams with values like ownership, radiate intent, it's a thing that I love. I think you have all heard the expression, it's better to ask forgiveness than permission, right? That's a lie, both. Asking permission is very passive. Asking forgiveness is, well, apparently you have done something that's not how you should have do it. Radiate intent is saying, I intend to, you declare to the whole world what you're going to do a couple of hours or days before you do it, giving other people time to push back or say, yeah, that's a good idea, and then you do it. Or you change your plan and you radiate your new plan. So I find that a very good balance between forgiveness and permission. Strong opinions, no surprise there, but hopefully also loosely hold, open to ideas and strong opinions of others. Stepping up, taking ownership, collaboration, etc. This is a quote that I love. A team is not a group of people that work on the same thing. A team is a group of people that trust each other. So the days that we're all in the office, we do have time for interactions. That doesn't necessarily mean table tennis or something. It just can mean conversations, or apparently we have 2 people who love motorbikes, so they walk around the parking lot and look at motorbikes. But it bonds and it makes them connect. The diversity and inclusion is important and happening a lot in that area in our field. We have actually seen that having different people with different qualities very carefully selected and put together in a team actually makes a sum that is larger than the individual qualities. For example, we have a tester who has a background in psychiatrics, and his solution is never technical. Never. That is a very refreshing point of view in a team with 4 software engineers. People that love their job and want you to buzz off as much as possible so that they can actually do what they love, so they don't flee into other things. I always say you need to love your job. You don't need to find other things at work that you like to do. And that's the people that work really well here. It also makes for an anti-fragile team. We had somebody leave the organization a couple of weeks ago by their own decision. And we didn't feel a thing when it comes to the work. Everything just continued because this highly collaboration, decentralized ownership makes it everything just carries on. And sometimes that's a little bit less efficient, but it's very effective, and it also makes us anti-fragile. I don't like the term junior, media, senior, but some people say, okay, so this is only for seniors. That's not true. We had a hire almost fresh out of school. We had a couple of months of experience somewhere else. And he stepped into this. And the second day, I confronted him with the fact that he was not doing code reviews. He felt he was not qualified yet. And we said, of course you do code reviews. First of all, you can learn from them. And secondly, if there is something that you don't understand, apparently the knowledge is not spread enough, which is not weird if it's your second day. And we want you to be up to speed as soon as possible. The second week, he got Hero of the Week. And he did nothing but just watch everything come in and then call out for help to decide what to do with it. But the second time he was the Hero of the Week, he could do that almost independently of all others. So it has a as long as people are able to decide what they can and cannot do on their own, this works out. Clear visions. I think I've talked about this for enough. It's important, I think, that you communicate the problems and not the features, and the boundaries that they have to operate within, and not individual decisions. So I rarely make a technical decision, but I have a lot of conversations with engineers. And it also makes that I'm now away for 2 weeks, and of course I read the chat. And it's very hard to shut up, especially for me. But I can see them just continuing with the decision making because they have the foundation for all the decisions already for months. And only when there is a change in the context, I have to step in and cast it, change in context. It also scales really, really well. I think the core is don't make decisions for others, but give them the tools to make the decisions that you like to see. As a great man once said, one more thing. Of course, we felt very novel and intelligent when we shifted to this way of working. But about a year ago, I ran into a write-up from somebody who I don't know. I hope I said this correctly, Urs Ensler. He worked at a company called Time Rocket. And they also drifted completely away from Scrum to a completely different way of working, and they call it the caretaker model. And why? Because they have a list of things to work on, and every engineer becomes the caretaker of one item and then drives it to done. This is the URL, and I found this a great read, and he explains a lot of the decisions and rationale below or under the changes they made as well. So what's the art of getting shit done? Well, meeting's bad. Think more, copy less. Know why you do the things that you do. Trust in your engineers. If you don't trust your engineers, why did you hire them? Really. And then question everything and get rid of everything without added value. And of course, this is an important thing, not get rid of everything. So what's the art of getting shit done? I don't know. It's not always Scrum, but I hope you can figure that out on your own. Thank you for your time and attention.